But before trying to find how we can think about the real origin of man, I would like to study with you one evolution of species which we know entirely, in which we know every step and every mechanism. This has happened partly in this country and started partly in Europe, but it has been very much continued in a little town of United States called Detroit. In that little town, they were manufacturing automobiles, and if you look at all the records, you will really find the whole history of this particular mode of locomotion. It's particularly interesting for the geneticist because a factory looks very much like a reproduction organ. A modern factory is made with very complex system. There are special machines doing special tools. We know that in a cell. There are some protocols written on long tape bands on big computers. We know that in life. That's the DNA coiled inside the chromosomes. And even we know how the model have succeeded one after the other. A few person here remembers possibly the horse-drawn carriage. Nevertheless, it's not that old, and I would take it at the moment that the old mare was replaced by the horsepower. Then it becomes an automobile. And to try to throw some light on the argument, I would study with you the history of the lanterns, the little projectors. Well, at the beginning, just at the moment that the horse became a horsepower, the lanterns were on the side of the machine, and progressively they went up to become the headlights. At that moment, they were submitted to a sudden mutation from acetylene to electric system. And curiously, in different species, of course, this change occurred at different times. But finally, in the long run, all the acetylene was replaced by electric light. But if you regard the morphology, it becomes exceedingly biological. Because at the beginning they were lateral, then they became in front. And on some species, they stayed there for more than 40 years. And they were extremely well set there. It was a very successful model. I speak about Rolls-Royce and about Mercedes. But there were already mutations on some system. Because of the aerodynamic laws, selection provoked that the projector were putting themselves, hiding themselves inside the fenders, or between the motor and the fenders, or in front they were covered by the calendar of the radiator. There were 3 models, and there was competition between them, but finally a compound of those 3 makes was happening, so that now the headlights are mixed with the fender and with the bumper in what we call a model, which just with little shift of physiognomy is present in every car, and we call it Auto Sapiens. The interesting phenomenon about this emergency of Homo sapiens is that we can explain it in two ways. One is to tell we know everything. All those tiny changes were made all by chance, but they were selected by the law of the market. If a model was hot selling, they were increasing the factory, the stock goes up in the stock exchange, and the shareholders were very glad, so that the model was reproduced at an enormous number. Look about the millions of Volkswagen, for example. Then we have the whole story of the evolution of the cars. Change randomly and selection by the market. It is extremely keen to the explanation of the Darwinist, and it is remarkable because it can be demonstrated to be correct. But in order to demonstrate that, I have to introduce to you a very interesting person which I would call a Darwinian bookkeeper. In Detroit, there was a Darwinian bookkeeper, and reading about the whole story of automotive evolution, he decided, I know everything. Novelty and market. That's the whole story. Then he went to the director of the biggest factory, and he told him, well, now we know what is the story of the evolution of the cars. You have to disband all those engineers, drawing board and all that stuff, which cost a lot and which is no interest. Because just you have to change at random some tiny pieces on the car, you put it in the market. If it is agreeable to the customers, then you will make a fortune. If not, you junk it. And that's it. And to convince Mr. Ford, he told him that he had a good friend who was professor of genetics somewhere, and who told him that the game that nature had played. And he said then, look, from amoeba to the tetrapods, nature has played that game. And look, we are. So you will, in a very rapid future, build a dream car and you will take all the market. I told you that all my stories are true, but I'm not entirely sure that it happened that way, because I suppose that even a banker would not incur on such a fancy system that to feed the money and to be rewarded is by chance some novelty has some interest. Because I suppose that some bankers do have in their desk an electronic computer. And if they are experimentalists, they can open it and change blindly two connections inside the heart of the machine. Now, they will very rapidly discover that their blind shift, which is a novelty, which is a mutation, probably does not increase the performance of their computer, but probably spoil the machine definitely. And it will be exceedingly rare that by a random chance it will get a new network that had escaped to the sagacity of the electronic engineers. Then, our very naive Darwinian bookkeeper was really making the demonstration that looking at the entry, which is a new model, and the output, which is the selling system, he was telling the whole story, but he had just forget about the engineers. And then the question we have to ask ourselves is whether there is somewhere an engineer. Now, I would like just to remember you of a very interesting piece of reflection by Mr. Darwin. It's written on his own autobiography. He had never heard about the history of cars, unfortunately, but he wrote, "Up to the age of 30, or beyond it, poetry of many kinds gave me great pleasure, and even as a schoolboy, I took intense delight in Shakespeare, especially in the historical plays. I have also said that formerly pictures gave me considerable and music very great delight. But now, for many years, I cannot endure to read a line of poetry. I have tried lately to read Shakespeare and found it so intolerably dull that it nauseated me. I have also lost almost any taste for pictures or music. My mind seems to have become a kind of machine for grinding general laws out of a large collection of facts. But why this should have caused the atrophy of that part of the brain alone on which the higher taste depend, I cannot conceive. The loss of these tastes is a loss of happiness, and may possibly be injurious to the intellect, and more probably to the moral character by enfeebling the emotional part of our nature. I think any student in biology should have read those words written by Darwin himself, telling how just grinding fact in order to make a general theory is really splitting your own brain and having the best part of it just unused and getting atrophied. When I read again those words of Darwin, I consider he was really a very good biologist and a very precise neurologist. Even I would say auto-psychologist. Well, what we need is not to make the bookkeeper count, which is correct, but which does not explain anything. What we need is to try to know whether we can discover where is the angina in life.